Welcome back, everybody. I am having a conversation today with attorney Scott Rattigan, also known as the Functional Lawyer. Scott, welcome to the show. Thanks for taking time out to meet with us.
My pleasure to be here.
So I found you years ago, just tooling around on the internet, Googling different concepts. And I was going through a process myself of thinking through some of the legal challenges and requirements of at least doing the type of practice that I do, which is mostly, if actually 100% virtual at this point, but at that point I wasn't. And your name came up. I'm fairly certain it was a Google search. And I really liked just the basic information that you had on your website. But before we dive deeper into a conversation about some of the challenges on the legal side of doing the kind of work that we do, tell me just a little bit about your legal background. And I think this makes you very unique in the sense that I don't know that there are many, if any, other attorneys out there that are really focusing in on the unique needs of a functional medicine practice. And when I say that, I'm including all licensed practitioners, right? Because the audience here with the podcast and the community is multidisciplinary, right? So I'm a chiropractor, but this kind of stuff is relevant to anybody who practices healthcare, particularly if they're into telemedicine, which, post-COVID, pretty much everyone's doing something, or at least they're thinking about it. So bring me back to your legal background. You practiced for a while, and then all of a sudden, now you're the functional lawyer. So how did all of that happen and come about?
Yeah. As you kind of noted, there's nobody else really out there that's outside of a traditional law firm kind of experience. And
yeah.
I'll touch on my experience inside a law firm, but I'll start with the end in mind. The reason functional lawyer exists at all in the first place is because people like you get started on Google and either couldn't find an attorney that understood what functional medicine was, even if they were a healthcare attorney.
Right.
But if they could, then the proper way to get set up at a law firm would be $25,000-$30,000. And
wow.
Most people haven't budgeted that to start the practice on just legal alone. So what ended up happening is people would go to Google and then they'd ask their colleagues or peers on Facebook for, hey, where'd you get this form? What form do we use? And as you probably know, when it comes to health information on Facebook forums, there's a lot of misinformation out there. It's kind of myths, and it's nobody's fault. I'm saying there's conspiracy behind it, but there are lots of myths and legal myths, and I like to say the game of telephone happens a lot. Well,
oh yeah.
My cousin's attorney in Wisconsin said that this was okay, so I'm going to roll with that. So
yeah.
I know that some people are okay with that sort of rolling of the dice, but I think the vast majority of people just needed a solution. So I actually started working at a top 100 law firm in Orlando, and this was right around the time my wife was starting her functional medicine practice. So
she's a DO. She's a DO, right? Yeah.
Yeah, she's a DO and had gone to IFM's initial program the year prior. And kind of, two spaces out of two at that point for everybody that kind of gets exposed to this telemedicine. So fast forward, I'm at the firm kind of doing litigation and quickly learning out what kind of do the fast version. And also at night helping her kind of figure out, all the things you have to figure out that start practice, like logo and website and the space and everything that comes after that as well. So our experience actually was I went to a healthcare partner at my firm, big healthcare firm. So I was on the 10th floor. I walked two floors up to the 12th, the top floor of the building. Asked him for help, and then ultimately, through no fault of his own, great attorney, big law firm, partner at it, just had more experience in the conventional world with hospitals and insurance, and was not really able to help us. And so then he asked us, do you guys have any templates that you already have that I can give you a review? So a couple of years later, I was burnt out, and I actually started working with, I was looking to get to a smaller law firm to help entrepreneurs, because big corporate law is big corporate clients. So it's nameless and faceless most of the time. So I was learning how to help entrepreneurs, but then I was following Evolution of Medicine at that time, podcasts and all of those. and actually got a position there. And so I kind of took a leap of faith and went to work with James and the team over there for about a year and a half. And during that time, I was talking to practitioners every day. And really, this is where I kind of understood the fact that this is a widespread problem. It wasn't just us that couldn't find an attorney to help. And so through the course of talking to hundreds of practitioners, probably thousands, I learned that it was a problem that needed to be solved. So
do you find, I'm sorry to interrupt your story, but do you find that one of the problems is that there's this pervasive lack of awareness and understanding of the need for this kind of legal protection? I don't even know if that's the right word among healthcare practitioners. Like, it's just not even on our radar.
I think there's a lack of knowledge about what you don't know. So Dr. Rumsfeld, unknown unknowns, or you don't know what you don't know. And so particularly with HIPAA, people think that notice of privacy practices is their HIPAA plan, and that's kind of just the tip. No, there's a lot more to it than that. And I get a lot of people that some of these well-meaning programs and others will give consent to treat, for example, or they'll just kind of have some basic templates for people, and they're like, well, if IFM's giving it to me, then
they think it's already vetted, right?
Yeah. So there is a little bit of a lack of understanding. I mean, just like think about it in your terms. There's patients that would come to you and say, well, can I have a stool test? I think I just want the stool test. Well, you got to back up and lay the foundations a little bit and kind of understand, we may not need the stool test right away. Or, this is a real true story. I'm not kidding. Someone asked my wife, is there gluten in a potato? So there's just a lack of understanding from your patients. And, even though you guys are really great professionals at medicine, you're just not professionals at law. So there's a lack of understanding there too.
Yeah. So you went from corporate to working with Evomed, and I was actually supposed to interview James right after you and I are done, but he contacted me yesterday and we had to push it out till next week. So I'll be having a kind of like a really big picture conversation with him next week. So you worked with them for a while, and so where along the way did the idea for Functional Lawyer come, and the concept, and I love your business model where you've got this membership. It's not like if someone wants it, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it's not like someone comes and you have a traditional relationship where they pay you X thousands of dollars as a retainer, although you might do that in certain cases, but you created this model that works like a membership. So, kind of walk me through the genesis of that idea, like, hey, we're going to do it this way, or at least mostly this way. Like, how did all that come about?
Yeah, it was really an evolution. It didn't start that way. I actually partnered with, because my healthcare, my background was not healthcare law. So I went on, while I was with you, a self-study course, basically to take all the CLEs I could. And then I also partnered with a law firm that does do healthcare law. And so initially it was really just, first of all, people would send me a document they to get themselves. We call them Frankenstein documents, because there's a little of this and a little of this, and sometimes the fonts don't even match up. And so I just knew that whatever was out there was pretty not good quality.
Yeah.
So I partnered with them, and the initial plan for Functional Lawyer was just to sell templates. Kind of people would say it's a legal thing, but for functional medicine doctors and providers. But I would do discovery calls and kind of pinpoint the ones they needed. And I would do those for free. They would end up lasting an hour. And I would just answer a bunch of legal questions for free, and they would not buy templates from me.
Sure.
But really, the reason that the membership came about was I would give all the answers, and they would say, well, what happens next? What if I have questions later?
Yeah.
And so that got me thinking that people needed it. They enjoyed it. Like, this is super valuable. What do I do next time? And so then I kind of spent the next several months putting together a library of training videos that answer all the most commonly asked questions that I got during those sessions. So they were free, and I was frustrated. That was good, valuable time looking back on them.
Yeah, for sure.
And so then that's where kind of the membership library came from, which now includes all of the templates And because people wanted access to me, we do weekly group calls as well. So I have.
Well, and I would assume that people get a chance to ask their individual questions in the group setting, and everyone gets to listen and hear the ansers.
Yeah, and that's the beauty. So I can afford to charge a lot less than a law firm, as you kind of touched on. Flat rate, very transparent, while still serving a lot of people because we're democratizing it, making answers available to everybody at the same time. And little dirty secret from the legal world, we always start with templates anyways. So even if at the highest top 100 law firms, I would get an assignment and they would say, check our files for the most recent example of a motion for summary judgment or a motion to dismiss in construction law in this state, and then just edit that. And so that's kind of like those two light bulbs hit it. And actually, while I was at the firm, I never liked the incentive system of billable hours either, because I always had an entrepreneurial mind, and I was like, well, this doesn't make sense. If I do this project in 2 hours, and then I have to go do more work. If it takes me 4 hours, then I make twice as much money.
Yeah, it's almost like it penalizes excellence, right? If you're really good at your job and you can do the same job in half the time of someone else, you end up having to work twice as hard to make the same income because you're done.
Well, I'll say that's a pretty naive view that I held, because as a lawyer, having more experience looking on it, like you really want to deliver high value to your clients at a low cost. So it does long term help you out. But for me, kind of a nameless, faceless work could be as a young associate. I was, and maybe a young person in the millennial range. I was a little bit disgruntled probably in the beginning. So now having a bigger picture, I still don't like that model because of the incentive system it does create, but that's all we're kind of used to. And that's why I don't do that sort of thing.
Yeah, perfect. No, and I like I said, I love the way that you've approached that. So when I've been doing online consulting in some form since probably about 2008. And I have gone through different transitions in my practice career where the amount of virtual stuff I was doing was either a smaller percentage or a larger percentage. There was one point where I'd been working from home for probably about 2 years, and we had 5 kids. They were all still at home. We homeschooled them for a while. And then there was one point we decided to move up to Tampa from down in the Sarasota area. And my wife said, like, you got to get out of the house. And so we moved up to Tampa, and I rented a local office. But I still, even though I had a local office, I still did at that point it was probably about 50% virtual and online work. And I started thinking, because I was getting clients that were out of state, and we're kind of like diving a little bit deeper, but I know that there are separate legal discussions to have. One is like documentation and setting up informed consent and your agreements to treat and all those things. And I don't know if you get into things like looking at what people do on their websites, because I know sometimes that can expose us to liability, how we communicate to people, things that we say. And then there's the whole domain of not just virtual practice, but more specifically, which is a growing segment, taking people from outside of your state where you might be licensed, and questions about that. And so back in 2008, 2009, I did my own probably very, very inaccurate or inefficient survey of probably about 20, 25 different states. Now I'm speaking from the chiropractic perspective, right? And this doesn't apply to medical and all that kind of stuff, and we'll talk about your book here in a second. I came away with the impression that pretty much every state board that I looked at, when I looked at their laws and rules, pretty much nobody had any laws and rules. And, there were a few states that had statements like, if the number of people that you see from our state represents less than X percent of your total practice, then we don't really care. And obviously that's my paraphrase, but that was the impression I came back. So I understood from the beginning that this was a huge gray zone because it was new territory. And I think from the provider standpoint, pretty much all of us want no borders, no barriers. We want to be able to work with anyone, anywhere, without any repercussions. So why don't we just kind of dive right into that topic, and then we can zoom out and talk about some of the other stuff. But, that's kind of one of my burning questions, is the whole legality of not just being online, not necessarily having face-to-face contact in person, but working with people, because you see it on pretty much every website. We have people from all around the world coming to see us, and it's a promotional tool. It's kind of authority building, that kind of stuff positions people as experts. But what kind of legal risk are people running by doing that kind of stuff?
Yeah, great question. There's a lot of different facets we can attack on that one.
Yeah, I know. I'm sorry. I'm rambled there for a little bit.
No, that's great. So I'll push back a little bit on your results of your survey.
Please.
There are some exceptions to the licensure rules for infrequent episodic care when you cross into a state in which you don't have a license.
Right.
But every state, and this goes back. I know some states, even in the middle of 2022, Pennsylvania had no law or regulation about telemedicine or licensure at all written down anywhere. Kind of some guidance, but every state kind of comes down to this: wherever the patient is located, you need to be licensed there, right? And then if you're not licensed there, you're practicing medicine without a license, which in every state is a felony. So,
and felonies carry what kind of penalty?
Criminal and civil liability. Usually, they'll say not more than 5 years in jail, not more than $50,000 in criminal fines. Not more than $10,000 or $20,000 in civil fines.
Right.
Now that's worst case scenario, of course.
Yeah.
But that's the penalty. If you're charged with a felony, that's pretty scary. And it does happen. And we don't see it a lot. It does happen. And so you're right. There are a lot of providers that do say and do get away with practicing all over the world without licenses. Right. So to date, enforcement and prosecution hasn't really been there, hasn't really been present. Now we've seen a lot of progress in the adoption of telemedicine across the country, across the world in the past 3 years coming out of this pandemic. And so wherever there's progress, there's always pushback, right? So, even 3 or 4 years ago, there was a health coach in Florida that got cease and desist and had to pay some fines because she was doing health coaching without a license, and so that got the board of dietetics.
I remember that story. Yeah.
So it's coming. And so my example of that is speeding. Because everybody's driven a car pretty much in America that, when you're on the road, particularly the highways, the speed limit is 70. If you go 71, you're breaking the law, right? But police aren't really going to pull you over. At the same time, if you're going 90 in Florida in particular, and you live off 75 for a while, and if you're going 85 in the middle lane, you're getting zoomed by people going 90 most of the time. And so I grew up here in Florida and learned at 16 years old that 85 is kind of the flow of traffic.
Yeah.
Well, I'm still breaking the law, and I got pulled over. I still have a pretty happy ticket today. I'm just kind of okay with that risk, right? That guy going 90 may get away with it for a long time. He might be able to go 95 miles an hour. He may never get caught, or he might get caught once every 10 years and pay the speeding fine and be okay with that. That's where I liken it to when people say I'm practicing all over the world. They're still breaking the law. They're just they're not caught yet, or they're willing to accept the risk of being caught. And so it's not my job to tell you what your risk tolerance is. My job is to tell you.
I was gonna ask about that because it seems to me that we're in this kind of like this funky, vague stage. Like, we know following the letter of the law, certain things are illegal, but the probability of getting caught, so to speak, is probably higher than we would like to think, but lower than might actually put someone at risk. So like, how does the average person, practitioner like me or your wife, balance that risk and reward and make a decision. I'm willing to take the risk because the reward is, fill in the blank, whether it's like it makes me seem more authoritative, or it is your authority, or we just now have a bigger pool of people to draw from. How do you balance that? Right? How do you coach? I know you're not going to make decisions for people. How do you coach them into making a decision? Like, what's the most important factor in your mind?
So I encourage people to take the safest decision possible. That's that they're okay taking. So one is, in your state, there are likely, in most states, millions of potential patients for you. And if you do the math in functional medicine, most providers, individual providers, can see 5 patients a day on a good day and still have energy to go home. Right? So if we look at work days in the US, excluding holidays and weekends, federal holidays and weekends, there's 250 work days. The 250 times 5 is 1,250 patient slots. If you don't take time off, if you don't take vacation, and if you work 5 days a week and you're full for 5 patients a day, 5 days a week.
Right.
So mostly, to have a decent balance, the most patients you could ever have would be 1,250 if they all came once a year. Right. So in your state of millions and millions of people, can you get 250 people to come see you 5 times a year? Probably, if you put your mind to it, do marketing, that in, right? So I say that's the safest way. Now, you have a website, so that website is advertising to the whole world. So it's very easy if someone calls you from another state and you just say, they're willing to pay you money. It's really hard for somebody to say no to that.
Yeah.
It would be a very disciplined thing of you to do to say no to that. Sorry, I can't see you. Unless there's some exceptions to something that happened there. Right. So I say, one, is focus on your state, get your marketing efforts dialed in a little bit better in your own state. Florida has 22 million people. The next thing is get licensed in another state. In particular, if you're in like a tri-state area or you're near a state line, those are very obvious candidates for you to get licensed in those states. Because still, even though we're telemedicine, a lot of our efforts are local still. But the good news is many states are making that easier and easier. So, as you mentioned in 2008, it wasn't a very easy way to go get licensed in a bunch of other states. Right. Go apply at each state board. It takes a lot of time, takes a lot of money. But it's the right way to do it, right? So, as I said, get a license in another state. Now, there are 16 states at present in 2023 that offer telemedicine-only licenses. So, much cheaper, much faster, and you can expand your reach just by doing that. So
I have a question on that, because I saw that in the book, and I've read your book, and I think you did a great job of laying out the let's call it the terrain in this area. And I would encourage anybody listening to get Scott's book. Obviously, check out his website. We'll include links to your website and the book all in the episode description. But it seemed to me as I was reading the book, and maybe this is because, your wife's the DO, but it seemed to me that most of, like when you were talking about these states have these, limited license for telemedicine, it seemed to be more on the MD-DO side, but you did occasionally make reference to, hey, this thing applies to chiropractors, acupuncturists, naturopaths, and, kind of listing the allied health professionals. So of the 16 states that you're talking about, and I know I cut you off before you said what you were going to say, I just want to clarify, is what you're going to tell us right now only for MDs and DOs, or does it apply to someone like me who's not, but nevertheless is a licensed primary care physician?
Yeah, the concepts are 100% the same.
Okay.
I think I touched on that earlier in the book, and I could have touched on it a couple more times. But you just have to make sure each state law applies to each license. So, for example, on this topic, these telemedicine licenses, Florida is very open and liberal and allows everybody from MDs down to like speech therapists and PTs to get a telemedicine license from outside of Florida. Whereas other states, Arizona comes to top of mind, only allow, they have DCs, reciprocity now, but then they only have the DOs, I believe it is. I haven't read the book in a while. I read it too many times while writing it.
Yeah.
But they only allow 2 sets of licensees to kind of get their telemedicine only license. So you do have to go check and I wrote down all of that and all the step-by-step process in the appendix of the book on those 16 states. But yeah, so if they allow telemedicine only license, you still have to make sure that your license is eligible and that your disciplinary history doesn't have any other things on it, and a couple of other qualifications as well. So
is the process just as simple as calling that state's board and having a conversation with someone about, hey, I'm licensed in Florida, I'd like to do telemedicine with people, say, in Arizona. How do I go about doing that? Or do you allow people with my licensure to do that? Is that the process that someone would go through?
Well, most of them have published programs if they have a telemedicine only license program. Again, that's only 16 states. If they don't, or if your license isn't eligible, then yes, you would apply at that state's medical board or the relevant board for your license. That's a good segue into the next way to get licensed in many more states is the Medical Licensure Compact, the IMLC. Now, this one in particular is only for MDs and DOs.
Right.
But there are many other licensing compacts around the country. This is just one that has the most states right now. So
are there compacts that apply to licenses other than MDDO?
Yeah. So the MDDO one has 39 states at present. They're always adding a little bit more each year. The nurse practitioners, who probably you're kind of focused in DC, but nurse practitioners are often forgotten as well.
Oh yeah.
They have one state. So that one's a little bit newer, and not as many states have signed on to it. But RNs have historically enjoyed good travel mobility with their state compacts.
Yeah.
And there are others, and I say them in the book too. But yeah, I think there's a DC compact right now. I can say that pretty confidently. And
so you talked about. I'm sorry to interrupt again, but you talked about the nurses and how they quite often do travel. It seems like there's a lot of inconsistency in different states and licensing boards. I mean, and maybe it's me crying foul and unfair that nurses get to travel all over the place and work in their capacity and under their training, whereas most MDs can't. I can't unless I have specific licensure. It just seems like they get it and they've lobbied well to be able to do those things. And maybe it's driven by nursing shortages, so they make more allowances. I mean, what's your take on that, on the terrain and in and around those concepts? And do you see it changing? Can we expect at any point to have state-to-state barriers come down to practice? Or are we going to see just this temporary reprieve because of the advent of virtual consulting and things across state lines because of COVID. And then it's going to kind of slam shut at some point when everyone goes back to status quo.
No, I think the cat is kind of out of the bag as far as patients love it, providers love it, everybody seems to love it.
Yeah.
Insurance companies are starting to get on board and reimbursing the same rates if you get insurance as in-person visit that has the same codes,
right?
And I mentioned those 16 states a couple of times that have telemedicine only. Just 4 years ago, there were 9. So in 4 years, the number of states that are expanding access, trying to make it easier, lower the barriers, has pretty much doubled. And so a lot of that was in the works prior to COVID as well. So I don't think we're going to see anything that's going to go backwards, so to speak. But at the same time, if we're waiting for a national license, that won't happen.
I think that's too big of an ask for sure.
Because states are in charge of the health and welfare of citizens, and that's why you need to be licensed in each state. So there's a lot of legal policy history that I don't get into, but each state licensing can have that power.
Yeah, no, for sure. The compact that you were talking about, and the dominant version is the one for MDs, DOs, nurse practitioners, I would assume, are included in that. How is that different than a national license or a multi-state license? Because my understanding is that it's just basically greasing the wheel, that you go through one kind of a central, let's call it a processing organization that then allows you it makes it easier to apply for licensure in these states. It doesn't give you licensure. Is that correct?
Yeah, so that one and the rest of them work very, very similarly, if not the same. So rather than we talked earlier about contacting the board directly, figuring out their application process, applying for a full license there, what these compacts aim to do is, like you said, grease the runway a little bit, where they are the ones that are going to vet you. So you submit one background check to them, one round of fingerprints. You verify your license and disciplinary history once you send it directly to them. You pay them a fee of at residence $700. And what they'll do is they'll issue you a letter of qualification. Now, all the states that are members of the compact have agreed to take that letter of qualification as pretty much you're qualified to get the license. So the compact uses the language that you can purchase a license in another state, just kind of without having to do all that stuff again. So if you're only getting one state, you may just go to the state directly and say $700. If you're getting 3 or more states, the math starts to change, so it might be worth it to go through a compact. But yeah, it's definitely not a national license or a 39-state license.
Right.
You still have to pay the full licensure fee in each state, and each state may have additional steps for you to take as well.
Yeah, and I'd say it's probably important to point out as well that not only do you have to pay that local state's licensure fees annually or biannually, whatever their system is, you also have to comply with their continuing education requirements.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. And of course, paying attention to what's happened in Florida in the last several years, Florida was one of the, and I don't know if you know much about this area, I'm sure you do, that it's only recently during the COVID era that we've been able to do as a chiropractor, our continuing education credits online. Like initially it was 0, and then it was like, okay, you can do like 10 hours. But now, just in the past year or so, they've changed that to now we can do everything online. Do you have much knowledge around that area? And I understand it might be different from degree type to degree type, meaning MD, DO, DC, whatever. Are the states working towards pretty much everybody at some point accepting online stuff? And, can I, for example, take an online course that I can use for my Florida licensure and CE credits and California, Arizona, New York, whatever?
Yeah, I think and my wife used to talk about having to go in person to at least one of her CLE, CMEs, I guess you guys call it.
CMEs, yeah.
Each year, and that's gone. And hopefully that in-person requirement doesn't come back, because it just doesn't seem like a good use of everyone's time.
Yeah. Well, the vendors at the exhibits might disagree, but
right, and how you approach it, cynically, we'll just say follow money, and kind of that's why they require it.
Yeah.
But as far as using it from state to state, you have to check with the Accreditation Society and what they're offering, and the state, what they'll accept. But yeah, a lot of times you can use those same credits across different states. But that's kind of on a case-by-case. You've got to check it out yourself. But I want to come back to
please
your question about RNs getting in better shape than maybe some of the others. And yeah, you know what? That's true. And what I get questions all the time from lots of clients about telemedicine. It's not fair. I wish it was like this. I wish it was like this. And my answer is, try to be diplomatic, but figure out the rules, play by the rules, and then go on. Like figure out how to win the game after that. So I was an assistant coach for 9-year-old baseball, and these guys have been complaining about umpires making bad calls. Listen, we're playing 9 kids in the other team and the umpire. So it's always 10 versus 9 every game. Then you don't have to worry about bad calls or missed calls. Just go play your best and win 10 runs, so the umpire's calls don't matter.
Yeah.
So what I do from this standpoint is try to bring that metaphor into your orbit is, you know what? Sometimes, life has rules that we don't love, but we got to figure out, am I going to sit and I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm just going to sit and try foul, or am I going to go out and just crush it?
Yeah, no, I
can go out and succeed despite the rules, right?
Yeah, and just to clarify, I certainly don't want to take anything away from the RNs. I want what they have.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
I'm more envious than anything else. It's like, it would be nice if we could do the same thing, or all licensed professionals could do the same thing. But again, I understand. You think so?
It's coming, but until
But
then,
not in the
it's gonna be-
sense that you'll have a single national license. You still, if you want to practice in all 50 states, you have to have 50 licenses.
Yeah, and if you've got people from every state, why do you have people from 50 states? Again, you can probably throw yourself up in your own state, or if you don't live in Florida, then you could get Florida as within 3 business days. Florida doesn't even charge you money, and avail yourself to our 22 million residents.
Are there any other states that are easy like Florida, kind of like the low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, the two easiest ones that have fewest restrictions are Florida and West Virginia, kind of all places. The rest of them, the other 14 have them, but you'll have to check kind of the fine print on the licensees they accept, the scope of practice you can do with that telemedicine license.
Yeah.
So it still is state by state, a little bit there. And there never was a 50-state like a waiver on licensing, as a lot of people thought during the pandemic. There never was. And I always teach the permanent rules anyways, because I don't think it makes sense to build a foundation of your business on shifting sands that waivers could expire at any time. So
if somebody wanted to keep their own thumb on the pulse of what's happening, like obviously there has to be some kind of a forum where this stuff is announced. Like, for example, like again, we're in the COVID era, and HIPAA rules now allow the use of certain communication tools that prior to COVID they didn't. For example, using Zoom for telemedicine, or Signal as a texting app. But prior to COVID, they weren't okay. COVID era, they are okay. At least I can't remember. There's a term that they use. Basically, it's like a non-enforcement policy for the duration of the pandemic. And who gets to say when the pandemic is over, and call it game and all that kind of stuff. But where would a practitioner go to keep their eye on developments? I mean, is that what you're there for, and that's part of the membership, that you do all that work and you kind of keep the group advised of things, or is that something that's outside of the benefits and the scope that membership brings with functionallawyer.com?
I have my finger on the pulse of all those different sources. I get a Google alert every day at noon. Anytime there's a HIPAA mention or telemedicine mention, and a lot of it's good. So you have to kind of wait, go to the sources. But yeah, you could certainly set up Google alerts for Health and Human Services.gov. If you could set one up for CMS.gov or OCR for HIPAA. There's a few websites out there that will tend to track telemedicine regulations. I'll caution you before I give you names of them that they're not always up to date, not always accurate. So please click through to read the state's law directly from the state legislative website or state regulatory website.
Sure.
So there's 2 big ones, and I have a list of them in the back of the book, as you've seen. The book title, by the way, is The Practice of Telemedicine. And it's a complete legal guide.
Yeah, sure. I know you have a copy there. Why don't you flash it for the screen there?
Yeah.
And you can get that on Kindle. I have the Kindle version just because I like to, I travel and I can't really hold a big library, so it's easier, but I do love the feel of a physical book. But you can get that one on Amazon.
Yeah, you can get it on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and
Barnes and Noble.
Very soon at functionallawyer.com.
There you go.
Because Jeff Bezos takes all the money from the books. But yeah, and for the $2 I get, really just to help people and just dispel a lot of myths that I see all the time. I say this all the time too, is I don't want somebody that I've advised, or I don't really want anybody in the functional medicine world to kind of be the example that I have to then tell the case study about in a year or two, because not only would it set you back, or set somebody that I consulted with, set them back personally, it would set back our entire kind of community as well, because as you probably know, there's a lot of antagonism still, for some reason, in the conventional world for functional integrative medicine providers. So it would just give a huge black eye to the whole industry, I think. So
yeah, and so that raises a question in my mind. In fact, it's popped into my head several times as we've been talking about it. You use the analogy of speeding. Yeah, you're breaking the law, but as long as you kind of keep it within a certain 10 miles an hour or less above the speed limit, you might not get dinged on any given day. How is someone who is practicing across state lines or even internationally, because I know a lot of us have clients in other countries, and I know you're not an expert of laws in Canada, the UK, but I'm sure you're going to say, well, if you're seeing patients in that area, you have to comply with those laws because it's where the patient is at. But how does someone get themselves caught? Is it because, I'm a chiropractor, Florida Medical Association says, I don't like what he's doing, and they bring a complaint against me? Or what's the most common trigger for someone to be investigated?
That's a great question. Let me start with a quick story.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of training programs, people that are teaching licensed providers, they can just call themselves a consultant and practice all across the country, when in fact that's evidently not true. Grab a copy of the book, don't get yourself in trouble with a felony charge against you. Because whether you call yourself a consultant or not, if you're practicing medicine, you're practicing medicine. And it's not limited to, I go through all this in chapter 2, but it's not limited to prescription drug, pharmaceutical drug prescriptions. It's not limited to accepting insurance. It's basically if you're treating someone and I couldn't do it because I don't have a license, then
right,
you shouldn't do it in a state in which you're not licensed.
And it's treatment defined as whatever your scope of practice is, or the scope of practice of your degree type in the state where the patient lives.
Yeah, that's a great point, because DC, as you know, scope of practice changes so wildly from state to state.
Yeah.
Not as much for MDs, DOs, NPs as well have largely different scopes of practice. And so definitely you need to follow the state in which you are licensed and the state in which the patient is located. Both laws at the same time. So,
yeah, and I'm sorry, go ahead and finish. Then I want to bring up a question that I had asked you last week when we chatted. But go ahead, finish what you're going to say.
So I attended kind of a webinar about one of those consultants programs, kind of just to see their response to legal questions. I didn't ask it was like a bullet point on their marketing. And so the answer was, well, if you create a good rapport with your patients and you have a pretty good disclaimer, you should be all right. Well, one, that doesn't mean it's legal, but two, the complaints typically don't come from patients. Most of the time they're happy, or if you give them a refund, they'll kind of go away. The complaints often come from other providers who think you're taking their market share, for lack of a better word. They come from family members of the patient, because not everybody in the same household is on board with functional medicine all the time. Or family members that are outside that household, so grown children, adults, parents of adults that are in their 30s or 40s, and people that just think they're being taken advantage of from, hey, you're just recommending all these supplements and tests, and it didn't work. Well, meanwhile, patients still eating McDonald's 3 times a week, so of course it's not going to work. So I think what I'm trying to say is, just because you have a good relationship with the patient, they sought you out, the kind of people I attract, and whoever sees me hear that all the time. That's not your only worry. Not to scare everybody, but it's kind of naive to think that they only come from patients. And so when there's a complaint from one of those people, often the state board will send like a secret shopper, or I don't like this phrase, but an undercover investigator to kind of pose as a patient. And that's how people usually get caught.
And they're doing that because someone lodged a complaint.
Typically, yeah. They're not usually out on the side of the road with their speed guns most of the time. It'll be complaint-based, but still. And so that's another citation by that consultant that said, oh yeah, it's fine. You're not actually policing actively. Well, I don't want you to be the one person that I have to talk about.
Sure. Yeah. So, and the question that I posed to you when we chatted last week was, what about, and we see this all the time in the medical community, whether it's individual specialists or you get big groups like Mayo Clinic or Cleveland Clinic, and people are flying in from all over the states. They're coming from different countries. How does that absolve a clinician from the obligation to be licensed in the place where they traveled from?
Yeah, so most states, if not every state, has some limited exceptions to these licensure rules. And I cover them in pretty decent detail in the book, but I'll cover some of them now. So we talked about infrequent episodic exceptions.
Yeah.
So that's usually if you have like 1 or 2 patient encounters in the state, like that's okay per year. Over 10 in the aggregate, not just per patient, but in that state, total over patients, you're probably needing to get a license there.
Yeah.
In fact, just recently, you mentioned some guidance earlier, but just recently, a couple of states have codified that 10 for Alabama and Arizona, off the top of my head, have said any more than 10 visits, you need to be licensed here. So that's one. Another one most people are familiar with is peer-to-peer consultations. So if you have a patient in your home state and you want to talk to a specialist in Colorado, you can call a Colorado doctor. The doctor, both of them can be on the phone, or it can just be a consultation from the peer's perspective, and that's not considered practicing without a license as well. So,
okay.
Usually those more established groups with armies of attorneys and really good programs will kind of rely on that. So they'll fly for the specialist visit, and then they will coordinate the home PCP in the patient's state.
Yep.
That, or they have specific physicians or providers that, maybe they don't have 50 licenses, but they'll have 10 physicians with 5 licenses each, so that they can follow up, right?
Yeah.
And that's the right way to do it. Now, I understand that there are a lot of smaller practices that say, if you flag me and then you go home, I can just kind of do it from there. Well, that'll reduce your risk a little bit, but you're still practicing in their state without a license, particularly if you have more than 10 visits there.
I thought that I read in the book that there was some allowance for follow-up visits, and I'm sure that, does that fall into that allotment of 10 that 2 states have codified, that as long as they're in person with you, no matter where they flew from, you can follow up with them with some frequency within, say, the next 12 months without getting in trouble?
Yeah, and that's a general exception. You have to check the fine print at each state level again.
Yeah.
But and that's typically for usually reserved, or the intent behind it was for like surgeries.
Yeah.
Right. And so these are all very narrow exceptions. I don't want people to get the impression in the last,
Yeah, it's not like you're escaping.
It's all exceptions. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I wouldn't build a practice around these exceptions.
Yeah.
Just knowing that if like your patient goes on vacation to Hawaii and they call you, don't like block their call.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's different than if you're availing yourself to Hawaii, you're marketing to Hawaii, you're saying I accept patients from Hawaii, and then you got 30% of your practice from Hawaii.
Right.
That's a lot different.
Do all or most states have well-defined laws and rules for allopathic type physicians, MDs, DOs, nurse practitioners, PAs?
Yeah, because that's what most people are familiar with. That's what the legislature is focused on first. So most well-developed policies are there. So that's a great point. If your state or the state you're researching doesn't have a written law, regulation, or any kind of guidance from your board, follow the concepts from the MDDO board, because that's what the legislature either wrote as a statute, or that's what they've approved as regulations from the board.
Right. So and that leads into the question, which was on my mind, is like, if I'm a chiropractor, someone's a naturopath, an acupuncturist, and their state or whatever state they're looking at doesn't have well-defined laws, would it be correct to think that their state board, if there was a perceived infraction, would look to the laws and rules that other professions have stated and then import those in that particular case, despite not having well-developed laws and rules themselves? Or is that a big gray zone that people who are very risk tolerant could play in and feel relatively comfortable because there's really no laws and rules?
I would, if I was a provider with my license online, I would try to get as much black and white certainty as I could.
Yeah.
That said, if you needed to, if you wanted to kind of skirt the line a little bit, then you could maybe personally extrapolate and kind of reduce your risk that way, like, right, I'm following the general guidelines, and I don't want to keep having a book, but it's a good place to start.
Yes,
it
yes,
summarizes kind of a consensus of the laws around the
Yep.
country. And there's citations to each state law too in the back. But that might be a way to go. I don't recommend it.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to paint you into a corner to give an opinion, but I'm just trying to think, like, if I were to, and let's say that somebody contacted me from Colorado, or I decided, hey, I'm going to do some social media advertising in a different state. Let me check out the rules for my licensure. And if there's nothing that's well defined, is it easier to not get in trouble in those states? If you understand the question.
Is it easier to not get in trouble in those states?
And we can pass on the question. It's okay. If you don't want to give me an opinion, I get it.
I can't really speak to that, because it kind of talks about, what's the likelihood of a complaint. And my approach to all of it is, if I play by the rules, I don't have to look over my shoulder at any point in time. Yeah. So if you really want to see people in Colorado and market there and make that part of your practice plan, then my recommendation is to go get licensed.
Yeah. That's the easiest way to look at it, for sure.
If it's one or two people, then you can maybe kind of start to potentially rely on those episodic or infrequent exceptions, but I wouldn't build practice based on exceptions.
Based on the exceptions, yeah. No, I think that's good advice. I'm watching our time here, and we're not quite at an hour. Do you have anything to say about areas in terms of things like website design or patient communication materials where people can get themselves in trouble?
Yeah, in fact, basically the short answer is be transparent in all your marketing materials. On your website in particular, if you don't have terms and conditions and privacy policy, particularly if you're in California, or have people visit your website from California, which is probably all of us.
Yeah.
And then a medical disclaimer. Another way to avoid some liability there, there's an uptick in ADA website lawsuits, so Americans with Disabilities Act. Websites are places of public accommodation, according to the Supreme Court. So a lot of plaintiffs' attorneys are just going on and picking off, different industries and suing them for ADA infractions, hoping for settlements.
And so what kind of ADA issues are they wanting to see? Like, how do you make your website ADA compliant?
Yeah, most of us able-bodied people don't really ever think about it.
No, we don't think about it.
There's a lot of people that are not just blind, but visually impaired, who need some sort of screen reader device or some assistance in interpreting websites. And a lot of times they'll have it on their computer. But at the same time, there are lots of standards set by there's international standards actually that ADA kind of just adopts for website accessibility. So it includes, like, if there's a picture, there's a little description of all text that students would pick up, because a blind person can't see the picture, but it'll be like woman smiling at desk on computer, right? For like a stock photo. And so those are the sorts of things. There's a couple pieces of software that people could use, and I go through all of that at functionalware.com. And then, just kind of just following the rules. I mean, we could talk for 4 or 5 hours.
I know. Well, there's one thing that in particular is on top of my mind. Now, I have, since 2008, lectured and taught functional medicine seminars for Apex Energetics, and they're a supplement. If you don't know who they are, I know you know who they are, but anyone listening, if you don't know, they're a nutraceutical company out of California, and they have a legal department, and they're very, very good at dotting their I's and crossing their T's in terms of things that we can and can't say in seminars and should or shouldn't say. And, one of the things that I learned from them is that words and phrases like treat, cure, and prevent seem to be exclusively the domain of treatment, like referring to pharmaceuticals, which obviously is not part of my licensure or my scope of practice. So I cannot, as a chiropractor, claim to treat things or to cure things or to prevent things. And so we, tend to have, or maybe should think about using different language that communicates the same idea, but doesn't use the jargon that seems to be the domain, the legal domain, as I understand it, of allopathic medicine. The contention is if I say something on my website that says, hey, we do these things and it will prevent heart disease, something like that. I'm just making that up. That might imply in the strictest sense that I am practicing medicine because I'm talking about treatment or prevention. Also insert treat and cure.
Yeah.
Do you know anything about that? Am I completely wrong? I could be completely wrong.
No, there's a couple of layers to that too. So, yes, of course, Apex as a supplement company, paying you to talk on their behalf has really strict rules that you can't say things as you represent Apex.
Okay.
And I'm sure you're very well versed in it, probably drilled it into your head, right?
Yeah.
That's a separate conversation as far as then what can you do as a provider? How can you market yourself as a provider? As a provider, you should, of course, stay within the scope of your license, scope of practice of your license. But within the scope of each license, there's lots of different standards of care, right? You should also stay within your standard of care. And I'll explain what that means in an example. Just going to MDs again, because it's what most people know. There's an MD that's family medicine provider, and you go to them once a year when you've got the flu, and then you go to them maybe when your kids need a school checkup. And otherwise, you probably won't see them very much. Their scope of their standard of care is their education, training, and experience. So largely, they went to a 3-year residency. They may have gone to a fellowship, but then they started practicing family medicine, right? As opposed to a heart surgeon who same license, same scope of practice under that license, scope is the same, has a much different standard of care. They've gone to a 4 to 7 year residency, may have gone fellowships after that, has extensive experience, training, and education in surgery. Same license, different standards of care. So I don't want to say that just because you have a license, you can't say the words diagnose, treat, or cure, because if that's part of your scope of your license, you're able to do it. If you have the requisite education, training, experience. So I get that question a lot, and it's a great question because there is a lot of confusion, particularly when patient comes back to you and says, my PCP said what you're doing is not standard of care. Well, it's not for that PCP
for them
because they didn't have those education, training, experience.
Yeah. Yeah, when that topic initially came up, like in Florida, chiropractors are primary care physicians, right? We have the right to diagnose and treat. Obviously, the treatment is all natural type modalities and not including drugs, surgery that are under the allopathic domain. And so it was communicated to me that even though my state allows me to diagnose, treat diseases, and I believe it was the FDA. That's how it was communicated to me. Basically the FDA was regulating the usage of those words, and that superseded the state language that was in our laws and regulations.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
Well, it was more of a statement, and just kind of that's the impression I came away with, was that I had to be careful about what I said on my website and even what I put in my documentation.
Yeah, no, that's great. So in particular for supplements, you can't make wild claims about them anywhere, even if you're not paid by Apex talking on your behalf, right? And I say wild claims, I mean, you say evidence shows, research suggests, but then you have to have that disclaimer on your website too. That brings up a good point about careful language, and going back to the consultant kind of gurus from before. And I know you know because you read the book, but it doesn't matter what you say you're doing, really. If you are practicing medicine, that's what you're doing. So
yeah,
I could tell you I'm a health coach all day, but when I'm an MD, I'm like, I'm a health coach, I can help you reverse your diabetes.
yeah,
And then I go and order tests, and even if I don't order tests, give you personalized clinical advice. That's the practice of medicine. I could rattle it all off. I mean, each state defines it slightly differently, but no matter what you say you're doing, if you diagnose, treat, cure, prevent illness, ailment, symptom, disease, condition, real or imagined, through personalized care, and some of them, again, define it much more detail. That's the practice of medicine. You'd be licensed there, or it's a felony. So,
and you're not using that phrase, the practice of medicine, in the limited sense of allopathic. That would include chiropractic medicine, oriental medicine, naturopathic medicine. It will be inclusive, right?
That, when I rattled off, was for allopathic, or for just the practice of medicine in general. You're right, and I kind of shorthanded it for the book.
Yeah.
But that just means for every license. So the practice of advanced practice nursing, or the practice of chiropractic medicine.
Yeah.
So I shorthanded it to the practice of.
Yeah, I didn't want anyone to mistake that and say, well, he's only talking about medical doctors, and I'm not a medical doctor. So I wanted that clarification.
Yeah, if you're doing something that otherwise would require a license or training to do, you can't just slap a health coach title on it and then be
sure. Fine. Yeah. All right. So as we start to wind up our chat, I know that you said you were going to think about like kind of doing a little summary statement and maybe some quick takeaways for people. You know, what kind of generic advice? Obviously, this is not specific legal advice, that I'll give you the disclaimer that applies to your unique situation, but just kind of general concepts that functional medicine practitioners of all types need to think about, be aware of, do some investigation, and maybe ultimately consider looking at your functional lawyer membership program. Like, just kind of give me the big picture summary. Functional lawyer Scott Rattigan talking to the functional medicine world.
I think we covered a lot of it.
Yeah, we did.
Staying within your standard of care and your scope of practice. Number one. Being transparent is number two in all of your marketing and messaging. Just this fall in California, a DNP, so a nurse practitioner with a doctorate, was calling herself Dr. Sarah, and got in a lot of trouble in California. Ended up paying a fine of $20,000 after the local prosecutors got involved. So just kind of be proud of the credentials you have, but don't be misleading in any sorts of ways. It's probably a good piece of advice.
So to that point, I mean, if I am a doctor of chiropractic, but if on my website I just say Dr. Noseworthy, but I don't somewhere clarify, hey, I'm a chiropractor, not a medical doctor, is that a problem for me? Or a potential problem?
I would make it clear somewhere, pretty prominently, that you're a chiropractor, at least once on the page.
Like my About Me page or something like that?
I mean, even it depends on the state. Even some of them just want you to say Dr. Noseworthy, DC. Not every time, but maybe like the first time that it appears on the page. Right. So being clear in marketing, don't deceive people, stay within your scope, your standard, check your license status in each state. HIPAA is much more than those privacy practices.
We didn't even get into HIPAA.
No, there's just a lot. So at functional lawyer, we talked about it's a flat rate. You should probably still talk to an attorney in jurisdiction. I can grease the runway for you by giving you all of the templates you need, give you a great baseline knowledge, so that when you go pay $500, $600 an hour at an attorney, you're not spending 5 hours with them. You're spending maybe an hour, because I've narrowed the focus down.
Narrow the focus. And you bring up a good point. Your service is not just for Florida physicians, correct? At least with the documentation and that kind of stuff, that applies to anyone, because it's dealing with issues and concepts and principles that supersede state by state requirements.
Yeah. So again, I partnered that law firm, and we made it as broadly applicable as we really could. There are some areas that are more state specific than others, like employment law. But yes, we have clients from all over the country. When I say client, it means students. It's carefully constructed to avoid my own unauthorized practice of law in other states. So
I see.
It will apply to every state, but there may be some subtle nuances that are just, not available on a 508 program.
Yeah, and I just realized that I've got a million other questions, and the more we talk, the more questions I have. So, I mean, I'd love to have you back on and maybe talk about HIPAA guidelines and particularly as it relates to things like telemedicine and messaging and communications before and after initial or the consultation itself. But also, some of the big stuff that's happening in the functional medicine community is doctors creating their own membership forums and communities and offering online educational programs. Like I myself have courses that people can just pay a fee and they can learn. And I'm sure that there's probably certain things that we have to have in place that makes it clear that this is not establishing a doctor-patient relationship. And and again, I might be wrong, but that's, now that I'm talking to you, I'm thinking like I probably need to go back and rework some of these things.
Yeah, I mean, the whole workshop isn't just that topic. How to structure an online course offering to be applicable across the country, across the world, without practicing medicine. Lots of people want to do one-on-ones. They want to include individualized testing, and I highly discourage that sort of online offering. Because we're very much in the definition of pretty much practicing all types of medicine at that point.
Sure. Yeah. Gotcha. Well, dude, listen, I appreciate it. And I think you've brought a piece into functional medicine that nobody else really has dealt with. And I think you've done our community a tremendous service. I love this idea of being able to work with a lawyer and get some advice in a membership arrangement and setting. So I'd highly encourage anyone listening to check out Scott's website, functionallawyer.com. Check out his book, The Practice of Virtual Medicine, available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and soon on functionallawyer.com.
Yeah, the practice of telemedicine.
Telemedicine, yes, I'm sorry. Yes.
That's okay. Yeah. There's lots of verbal fluidity here and there, so I'm trying to keep the terms correct.
Yeah, awesome, Scott. Thanks for being here, and I hope I can get you back again.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.